innovative approaches to attract, engage, grow, and retain top talent. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the content director for eSchool News, and I'm happy you are joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by Frontline. Frontline HCM is a connected human capital management suite, which equips schools with everything needed to support the entire employee lifecycle, from recruiting to retirement. Built exclusively for K-12 education, it includes applicant tracking with proactive recruiting capabilities, seamless onboarding, connected time tracking and absence management functionality, professional learning and evaluation tools, and the ability to oversee benefits, compensation, and position management with automated workflows across the suite. Designed around the unique needs of K-12 and flexible enough to support state and local regulations for time tracking, performance evaluation, and hiring practices, Frontline's HCM suite brings greater efficiency, productivity, and performance to school districts so leaders have more time to focus on what will most support great teaching and student learning. So before we get to our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some features of the platform that we'll be using for this webinar. The event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. If you have a question or comment for us, there is a chat function that you can launch. Feel free to use this feature to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you're having a technical question. And otherwise, I would highly encourage everyone, if you have a thought or a question, or even a challenge to our panelists here today, it really does help in the conversation to know what the audience is thinking. So please join the party. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our conversation and some introductions. First, we have Kevin Agnello. Kevin is the product manager, Human Capital Analytics for Frontline Education. He is a former high school mathematics teacher and holds a master's degree in educational curriculum and instruction, as well as a master's degree in educational psychology, and is working on a dissertation towards a PhD in that same subject. Also, we have Keegan Bassett. Keegan is the director of human resources at Queens Creek Unified School District. He has been serving K-12 education for almost 9 years in various administration roles. Keegan holds a bachelor's from the Arizona State University Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College and a master's of education from Wayne State College. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.
Wonderful, thank you.
And maybe, Kevin, yeah, we'll get started with you. Maybe, there's so much here at the beginning of 2024 after the past several months of various degrees of chaos, right? I mean, going from the depths of the pandemic into whatever our new normal is now. A lot has changed in the education space from an administrator standpoint. The way that administrators look at data, how they use platforms such as Frontline has changed a lot. Maybe start off by just kind of giving us a state of play from your point of view.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. Conversations like this are one of my favorite parts of my job because I've been at Frontline for about 6 years now, and I've had a few different roles here. But one aspect of my job that has remained consistent over the past 6 years is having the ability to analyze recruiting and hiring trends in a nationally representative data set of about 1,500 school districts representing all 50 states. So I'm able to see trends at a very high level, most often anyways. So I'm always very excited when I get opportunities like this to speak directly with districts and people like Keegan, because that helps me contextualize some of the larger trend data that I see. So, over the more recent years, I've had a few opportunities to work with Keegan, and I've learned so much about data-driven HR practices from him, and I'm sure everyone on the call will today too. But from what I see at a larger sort of perspective in our national data sets related to recruiting and hiring, and one way that we represent data in a lot of our thought leadership pieces and research it relates to the teacher shortage. That's been a very popular and common topic of conversation throughout K-12 discourse. And Frontline has tried to be a voice in that by publishing a couple of different blogs and research papers to that end. And it's a topic that Keegan and I have talked a lot about in recent months. But one interesting thing that I'm seeing in our recruiting and hiring data regarding job postings is on average, the average district over the past couple of years doesn't really have all that different of a trend in terms of the number of jobs being posted per district over time. But where the teacher shortage is really apparent is in the number of applications and number of applicants that are available to fill those positions. So when I work with folks like Keegan, the data analysis tends to focus on all applicant-driven information. Where are applicants coming from? What are our pipeline stages like? What's our hiring practices, and can we speed those things up? What are we doing to attract clients and applicants, excuse me, which is where I do a lot of, that's where a lot of the learning comes from in conversations like that. So and kick it over to Keegan a little bit too, to talk a little bit more about that too. Keegan, I guess what's been going well for you and your HR team recently, and what challenges are you facing down on the ground?
Yeah, so for a little bit of context for the audience here today. I'm Director of Human Resources. It's a brand new position that's focused on recruitment solely. Our school district is 14,000 students. We've opened 6 new schools in the past 8 years. So we're in the Phoenix metro area in what we would consider the East Valley. So we're a rapidly growing area. We're set to open another new school in the 25-26 school year. So the position has really evolved since I took it in the summer of 2022. And to the question of what's been going well, growth is one of our biggest things that's going well for us, because as we continue to absorb new students, we're able to open up schools. But as you know, what the biggest demand there then is trying to be able to adequately staff those schools. So areas that are positive going well for us would be that growth that we experience. When we start to dig into some of the data, and we'll obviously go further into this, but we have a surplus of elementary teacher applicants. So that's always an area that's going well when we look at our applicant pools in comparison to others. And then administrative support staff. So think of your office staff out there, both at the school level and then department level. Those areas are going well. We have a hardworking group of educators and department leaders across the board that are open to data discussion. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that that's going well, because when I present to them and we host workshops and go over what our current reality is, and not just speaking in theory of, hey, here's what we're hearing about a shortage of educators, but really diving into what we're experiencing as Queen Creek, not necessarily as the Phoenix metro area or the state of Arizona or national trends. They're receptive to that, and then we're able to action plan based off of those discussions of what they report back to us as well. And then we are able to leverage the different data that we're able to access through HCA to map out what our both short-term and long-term goals are.
I think you just made a really important point. And I'd like to show some national data that I was talking about, because you just reminded me of a really cool point. So this is the first thing I'll show here is these 2 metrics that I mentioned a moment ago. This top metric is what Frontline calls the demand metric as it relates to the teacher shortage. This is the number of the average number of teacher job postings per district over time. So I have 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and all of 23 in here. The bottom chart here is what we refer to as the supply metric, so your supply of applicants. So these are this is the average number of applicants per teacher job posting over time. Again, this is a nationally representative data set. It's about 1,500 districts, and it's the same group of districts that I track in here over time. So it's not, this isn't a different group of districts over time or anything like that changing the data. This is the same districts over time. So it's a really good way to track some of this data. But what I see is, aside from 2020 in terms of job postings per district, aside from 2020 when we were like in the depths of all that COVID stuff, the average number of job postings per district, there's not much variation there. You can see your typical hiring season that ranges, March, April, May, June. That's when all your college graduates are graduating with their teacher certifications, and when retirements are in at some districts, or resignations. So people are looking for jobs in that time. That's when hiring happens. And you see that with the spike in job postings there. But from year over year, the difference in job postings in like 2019, pre-COVID, to 21, 22, and 23 isn't all that different. It's like 1 or 2 job postings. So what that says to me is that the teacher shortage idea is, less people leaving than it is something else. And that something else is the supply of available applicants, which is down here. So same time frame, again, same districts I'm talking about here. It's almost a perfect trend here that every year, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, we get less and less applicants per posting. And this is in the national picture. But one thing that I've noticed is when we split it up by region, because Keegan, you reminded me a moment ago when you were speaking of national trends and regional trends. When you split it by region, so like your central region of the United States, the trend kind of matches the national trend, where like job postings, not much variation, but supply of applicants, huge drop. But then when you go out into like your South, look at the applicants. It's like almost similar year over year. There's like less of a supply teacher shortage when we're looking at the South region. And I think same thing out West too, if I remember correctly. Out West too, yeah, there's less variation in the differences of the average number of applications per teacher job posting. So Keegan, I'll kick it back to you here. I just showed you a national trend. I showed you some regional trends there. What do you think these trends are like in your district? And how have you been sort of combating whatever you may be seeing as it relates to data like this?
Yeah, we actually utilize, there's a feature within the HCA guided analysis where I'm able to overlay the years just like that graph you showed, Kevin. And I recently presented it to our cabinet showing what is our trends for our open job postings and then what are our trends for our applicants submitted during that same time. And very similar to what you just shared, I actually talked to cabinet about this right before the winter break holiday season about how for us, we are actually seeing a nice return on investment of some of our recruitment campaigns and different marketing strategies that we utilize, because as our open job postings are either staying flat and or decreasing slightly, which is a testament to the work of our overall team here at Queen Creek, we're seeing an increase in our applicant pools. So that, like I said, is in isolation of Queen Creek and some of the different things we're doing. But that's also because we have dedicated a great number of resources to really dig into what our trends are and then how we can make modifications as needed. So if we're seeing a dip in the applicant pool from 1 month to the next month in comparison to previous years, that's where then we start engaging our marketing department on different initiatives that we need to be taking into account to try to really press upon how we need to improve those areas to help support those hiring managers that are ultimately pressed to put the very best and brightest in front of our students. So to answer the question kind of holistically, our trends somewhat similar, but at the same time, because of our general area that we're working out of that is booming in terms of residential and growth, we don't deal with nearly as a large of a struggle as other areas with the applicant pool. Now, I don't want to paint a rose-colored object here and act like everything's all glitzy and glamoury in Queen Creek. We definitely have our hard to fill areas and our positions that are giving us the most challenge. And that's to me where HCA really comes in of why we chose to go down this path of this platform to access that data to then be able to zero in on what are the key areas that need to have the most attention and most resources deployed towards to address, rather than an overarching just general statement like a teacher shortage. And so we're able to zero in on specific positions such as, let's say, high school foreign language. A lot of people don't talk about that when it comes to teacher shortage, but we know for a fact, based off of data from the past 3 years we've gathered through HCA, that that is an area that's a struggle for us. And so we try to combat that and figure out how we're going to address those. Obviously, some of the more commonly heard ones that the audience probably relates to would be math, science, special education as well. But even like fine arts performing, that would be an area that we are regularly tasked with trying to struggle to fill because the applicant pool is dwindling in those areas.
Great. I have a follow-up question on something you mentioned, but before I get to that, I just want to clarify one thing quickly for the group here. When I'm not sure if I've said this yet, but when Keegan says HCA, he's referring to human capital analytics, which is just, I know, one resource that Keegan uses to analyze a bunch of his human capital related data. So that's what HCA is, human capital analytics. Sorry if that was repetitive. Just wanted to clarify that real quick. But Keegan, you mentioned that you are seeing return on investment on some of your recruiting strategies, I believe is where you mentioned ROI, your recruiting strategies. I guess two-part question. How do you know that you are getting a return on investment on some of those? And how did you know to institute them? What sort of data are you using to understand that? And how are you learning and growing and making changes related to that?
Yeah, so the first part of how do we know, what we did last year was we modified our application process to require applicants to report back their referral source. We also hired an HR recruiter that we basically shield away from the other day-to-day operations that human resources can require somebody, so that their number one job is to just regularly engage with applicants, get to know how they heard about us, what caused them to be interested in applying. And so within the human capital analytics platform, we're able to then pull out what percentage of our applicants are coming from different referral sources. So as an example, we'll shift away from teachers and we'll talk bus drivers, because that's another big national trend in terms of transportation department and school districts are struggling with. Last year, we were short probably 50% of our overall allocated bus driver department. And so we were looking to have to 100% hire out. We had, let's say, use an easy number. We had 40 bus drivers. We were staffed to have an FT of 80 bus drivers. And so in the fall, we initiated a plan where we did YouTube commercials, we did print media advertisements about the position, we hung banners around the town, we handed out palm cards at career centers, and each one of those different referral sources that we utilize, we then would list as part of the application process to see, okay, where are we getting the best ROI on our action steps? And it turns out, for any of you looking for bus drivers, at least in the Queen Creek area, hang some banners up, talk about your average hourly rate. It's full-time benefits eligible and overtime, paid training, at least that's what we offer. That by far generated the most applicant pool based off of referral source. And so that's how we're able to pull it. I'm pretty long-winded sometimes, Kevin, so remind me what part two of that question was.
I think you hit on what I asked there, but I do have a follow-up on exactly what you said. So you listed a few of the approaches that you've used, particularly for bus drivers, some of those referral sources. Were those referral sources you've ever used in the past, or have you found yourself and your team trying to get more innovative to find folks for different positions? And then do those referral sources vary by the type of position that you're looking for?
So to my knowledge, we had not utilized a variety of those. And so from there, it's a lot of think tank collaboration amongst our own district, but also as in East Valley, the HR departments, we collaborate once a month. We throw out different ideas. It's research across the country. One of the other ones I didn't mention, but that we deployed, was we did a referral source from current employees, where we did basically a stipend for anybody who referred a new employee that got hired on. We did sign-on bonus, and that's stuff that we found through research of what other school districts and even private sector areas were doing to try to address those issues. So when it comes to the different ideas, it's a comprehensive effort, both internally from within the district brainstorming sessions, but also seeing what else is out there, talking to colleagues from other districts, even other states, and even other areas of employment. So not necessarily just only looking at it from a school district perspective, but what is an organization like a Walmart or an Amazon doing to try to make sure that they're hiring truck drivers, because it's a very similar concept with bus drivers, of a CDL driver's license as part of it. And then there's different endorsements. Obviously, as you can tell, when I stopped into this position, I had no idea what it took to be a bus driver. Now I can basically tell you the entire scope and sequence of the training process, because you really have to dive into each position type and learn all the intricacies of it if you're going to be able to recruit for those areas effectively. And so that kind of segues into your second part of, do you modify and make adjustments based off of the position type for your different strategies? Absolutely. What we found is the ways we engage people for very specific classified staff positions is going to be entirely different than what we would maybe do for certified or administrative level positions. That recruiter I mentioned earlier, I can't stress enough how effective I feel like that person's been to our team, because they are day in and day out answering phone calls and emails and being a direct point of contact for people, which, depending on a certain type of position, there are some very specific questions that that people want to have answered before they'll even commit to starting an application. And as we all know, we can't hire them until they at least start the process of submitting an application. And so we create our own specific recruitment phone number. We have our own email address, so we have that point of contact that help guides people through, because our overall goal is obviously to cast the widest net possible of our applicants to then allow our hiring managers to select who they feel is the highest quality applicant for a position.
Very interesting. Cool. And I'm sure you use some data from the like from your recruiting and hiring system that you use. You've mentioned human capital analytics a few times. Where else are you pulling data from? And are these systems things that you put in place solely for the purpose of collecting data, or was it data that your district was collecting anyways that you just happened to be using in productive ways?
Yeah, we've talked a lot, mainly primarily about recruitment, but we're also always looking at retention data. And so we pull from our own internal HRIS system, so our human resources information system, to gather trends in regards in relation to longevity of employees, turnover rates, if they're moving from one position to the next, and different transfers. And so that's all data that's always been collected. But ultimately, in the last 2 years since I stepped into this role, we started to create what we would call an HR dashboard, where we're piling all that into one specific area to really analyze different trends and pieces of current employees. And then we merge that with our applicant data and new hires as well. Other data that we grab, I had mentioned marketing a lot. So in Queen Creek, like I said, depending on the audience, we consider ourselves like a middle tier, smaller school district compared to some of our larger counterparts in the East Valley of the Phoenix area. And so we have a very small marketing team, and their focus is on enrollment primarily. So with that, we've had to collaborate with a third-party marketer. And so then that organization, we asked them to create a dashboard, because we go as far as analyzing what is our click rate, what is our view rate for Facebook in comparison to Instagram, in comparison to TikTok, in comparison to LinkedIn. We analyze the third-party job platforms that a lot of people utilize for recruitment sources, whether it be Handshake, Indeed, Career Builder, LinkedIn Recruiter as well. And basically all those different pieces give you more information than you could really ever digest and utilize in a comprehensive way, unless you make that your top priority and sacred time earmarked out to really digest and map out, okay, what are we seeing from each area? And then how is this actually aligned to our KPIs and our goals that we're trying to achieve, both short-term and long-term? And then from there, that's where we find the basically high performers, and we figure out how we need to leverage them to have that apply to other areas if there's alignment to them. And I say that as an example, like we'll go off on other platforms like you had mentioned aside from HCA. So LinkedIn Recruiter, we use that platform, and we're really looking there to source applicants more so for certified administrative level positions, whereas Indeed, we're looking more at maybe hourly classified staff. And so figuring out which platforms make the most sense for which areas that we're trying to recruit for. And then ultimately, like I had talked about previously, the applicants then are required to answer that question of where their referral source is from. And we're able to pull and say, okay, what's our percentage of teacher hires that we receive from LinkedIn Recruiter versus Indeed versus Career Builder, and go from there on things.
So I hope this isn't a leading question, but trying to summarize all of the data sources you just mentioned, it sounds like, excuse me, a lot of the data that you're using is coming from systems that that were already in place. Like the data was being collected anyways. It's just a matter of using the data that's there. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's fair assessment. It was always different. The only piece that I would say we added was that third party marketing agency. And that was, like I had mentioned in the very beginning, our leadership giving the attention and resources necessary in order to be a successful school district when it comes to staffing in today's world. And so being able to allocate out that budget and resource to engage a third-party marketing agency to really say, okay, if we're going to push our hiring managers and our teams to be fully staffed at the beginning of the year, what all do we need to take care of to help support them? And the underlying factor that everybody knows is you got to have an applicant pool. And so that would be the one that we added. But all those other ones that I mentioned, they have all been in place for, at least to my knowledge, the handful of years previously.
Gotcha. Okay, so again, just summarizing, it's really cool that you've noticed, that you're utilizing all these different systems and recruiting strategies that are collecting data, and there's data out there for you to use. And you and your team have gone out there and used it. You've gone the extra step and getting that data, trying to join it together and make sense of it. That's super cool. It's really interesting. Now, are any of those recruiting strategies that you're using, or maybe any of the platforms that you use that you advertise on, have you found any of them to be better at recruiting quality candidates, or expanding some of the applicant pool where maybe your budget doesn't allow for just simple, increasing a salary to make a job more enticing? Are there recruiting strategies that you use specifically in place of, budget constraints that you can't, hope the applicant pool will expand because of?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. I'm still only a year and a half in this position, so I don't feel it'd be fair to say, hey, there's any one platform that we feel is the best performing necessarily. I would say that we've definitely identified more than anything that a priority is how do we engage an applicant when we get their name. So really, for us, it doesn't necessarily have so much to do with which platform are they coming from. It's what are we doing as soon as we hear that teacher A is potentially interested in Queen Creek Unified School District, and how are we making sure that we're being proactive in getting them to the finish line of submitting an application, being invited to an interview, and then keeping them engaged as we work through the hiring timeline, more so than anything. I mean, yeah, there's been some platforms that I think we've slowly dialed back and phased out of because of the performance or lack thereof. I don't think it'd be fair to share those right now. But when it comes to like high performing ones, I have not seen any one area that really stands out when it comes to sourcing applicants. I think for us, the success more lies in strategically and intentionally taking immediate action as soon as you get a name, because it is a very competitive applicant pool. When it comes to, there's a lot of jobs out there within every district, and in Arizona, for anybody who isn't familiar, is a school choice state. And so there are a lot of charter schools within our general area as well that we're all fighting for the same small pond of fish. And so with that, it comes down to more, what are your action steps that you're taking as soon as they come into play?
Very cool. You've talked to me about this before, and you just reminded me when you were given that answer there. That combating the idea of like a teacher shortage or just finding applicants. It's not only about expanding your applicant pool, but once you have them, it's keeping them engaged and then moving them through your pipeline as quickly as possible so you don't lose them. I think you've mentioned before that you've noticed that you've lost applicants that were qualified for the job that you wanted to extend an offer to, but because your process took so long, they went elsewhere. And I know you've done a lot of work, putting you on the spot here. I know you've done a lot of work in refining and analyzing your pipeline stages and each step that an applicant has to go through. And I think you even instituted like professional development for your HR staff to that end too, right? Can you talk more about that? Talk about how you've analyzed your pipeline stages, how you've refined them, the data you've used there. Can you just talk about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we view it as like a hiring life cycle, I would say. And as soon as, I'll use my name as an example. As soon as Keegan Bassett expresses interest in being a math teacher, whether it be because they started an application, but in red it shows not submitted, or they even clicked on a Facebook ad. So we received it as a Facebook lead. One of those first stages is, what is our first level of engagement and customer service that we're providing to that prospective candidate? And that all starts with our HR recruiter giving a phone call, reaching out via email, asking some questions about their skill set. What are they interested interested, how can we then drive them to the positions that we have available? And then if we don't have them available, projecting out what possible positions we may have down the road so that they keep us in mind. And so that to me is an initial pre-stage that they don't even enter. But then in the pipelines, the very first pipeline stage we would look at is submitted. And once an applicant is submitted, we're then looking at, after they're submitted, how many days does it take our hiring managers to review those applicants? And obviously a job has been posted if they submitted the application. So has our hiring team set up a timeline for when they plan to conduct screening of applicants? When do they plan to conduct interviews? A lot of times for our positions, we require a screening interview followed by the comprehensive interviews. And we expect our hiring managers to map that out on the front end as soon as they know they're going to have a vacancy and a job posted, because it does two things. One, it allows our recruiter to talk through with a candidate the timeline. So they have a projected timeline and they have that transparency of understanding, hey, here's what we're looking at for what this will look like for processing wise. And then two, it holds them accountable to make sure we're not missing out on somebody. We don't talk about enough all of the other day-to-day demands that are placed upon school leaders. As a former elementary principal and high school administrator, that just continues to grow. And so one of the things that I press upon our team is the more we can have things structured and set up in place, and you prioritize that and you make sure that sacred calendar time, the more likely we are going to be to have a successful hiring process and secure the qualified candidate we want. If we delay and push off interviews after an applicant has submitted an application 2 and 3 weeks, that person's already got 2 or 3 different job offers, probably by the time you're calling them for an interview, at least from our perspective down here in the Southeast Valley of Arizona. And so that to me is a big part of submission, and then making contact with them after you've done your screening to select which candidates you want to interview and having those calendared out in advance. Now, fast forward to, let's say the interviews are completed, the committee has selected who they want to proceed with reference checks on. They would then move into that next stage of the pipeline of conducting reference checks. At that time, it's imperative they stick with whatever timeline they're sharing out to their applicant pool as they close out interviews. Typically, a hiring manager should be ending an interview by sharing out, thank you for your time. We have interviews, whether it be Wednesday and Thursday of this week. We plan to make a decision by early next week after reference checks are completed, and then we would submit a rec for hire. If that administrator, let's say just from a school perspective, it's an elementary principal interviewing for a 3rd grade teaching job, tells an applicant that on Thursday, but then they push that off to the side and they don't touch it again for 2 weeks, I consider that applicant gone. They're in all likelihood interviewing for other positions. They're probably taking another job. So they have to stick to their timeline and move them through the reference checks to then finally turn it over to my team and submit a recommendation for hire. And then at that recommendation for hire, that's where really HR comes in, of how quickly are we reviewing the applicant credentials, the experience, generating a job offer, confirming acceptance, going through the background checks, all the different pieces that we have to put in place to ultimately schedule them for onboarding and get them in here to sign a contract and become a member of QC's team. When it comes to the PD, what you had talked about, so there's 2 parts that we do there. I meet with my own internal team pretty much once a month, and we go over different questions they have for the variety of areas of their job. But one of the things we do each month is we also review our HR onboarding data to showcase how long has it taken us to process recommendations for hire. How many days on average is it taking us to secure an acceptance from an applicant? We have some general rules of thumb that we require our HR specialists in regards to, as soon as you get a rec for hire, you send out an email to that applicant congratulating them, letting them know you're reviewing their application. You'll be in touch with them shortly as they go through the hiring process. And then if there is unresponsive, we have some certain parameters in place that we require them to do to keep them engaged throughout that process. Because like I said, above all else, we're always assuming that any candidate that has applied for a job with us has probably applied for 5 different districts. And if we don't move quickly and aggressively, somebody else is going to take them up. back to the PD thing, I've hosted professional development for our principals. I host professional development for our own department. And then actually next week, we'll do what we call an all team as we gear up for the hiring season. And that will be a hiring timeline and expectations for all departments within a district. So everything from transportation department, child nutrition, our community education department, and we make sure we engage all of them in that same process and expectation so that we can be successful during each hiring season. And then I guess I'll end with this. For us, we've identified a window of from the time a job has posted to the time that that employee has accepted and been scheduled for onboarding should be between 21 and 28 days on average is what we're pushing for. Anything after that, more than likely, you got to factor in that if you're applying for a job, you're actually looking for a job. If it's a classified job, you really need to be moving quick because they're looking for hourly employment that starts immediately. And I regularly try to keep my finger on the pulse of the private sector. And you see all the different advertisements from whether it be major retail stores, fast food restaurants, different things like that, where they promote, hey, apply today, work today, get paid today. Well, we can't do all that in the public education sector, but what we do focus on is what we can control and the timeline that it takes to get people through those processes and what areas that we can really trim down to be as competitive as possible versus a McDonald's or somewhere else that's trying to promote the idea that you could walk into a place, apply in the morning, and by the end of the week, you're already getting paid for your first week of work.
Wow. All right. There was a lot there. I mean, a moment to digest a lot of those nuggets that you shared. But while I do that, there was a question in the Q&A related to difficulty of finding a foreign language or filling a foreign language position. It's something that you had mentioned as well. Do you have any tips or referral sources that have worked for foreign language in particular, or just any tips to answer that question there?
I'll let you know after this spring. This is our first time of really identifying it. Like I said previously, this is year 2 of myself in this position. And last spring was the first time I was able to really see how challenging it was for us to hire some Spanish teachers, both at the junior high and the high school level. Some strategies that we've tried to deploy, and we'll see how successful they are. Engaging with your college and universities, both locally, but we also go the regional route. We try to connect with those career centers. We try to connect with those colleges of ed. We try to gather as many lists as possible as we can of future graduates to try to get those people going straight out of college that are going to be graduating with the required certification and approved endorsement areas that we need. And so that's a piece for it. And then another piece for us is with marketing, like I said, we're trying to constantly stay abreast to what our actual active openings are and make sure those are being promoted. So instead of just a QCUSD now hiring advertisements on Google Display, we're saying, hey, Eastmark High School has a chemistry teacher that is open. We encourage you to apply, and making sure that people really understand what positions they are. The more we can feed out that information and push that onto the applicants so that they're not required to go dig through our job board and see what's available and out there, the better. And like I mentioned earlier, for me in particular, I can't stress enough the success that we've experienced from adding that phone number and having that HR recruiter with its own individual email address. I don't know about every district, but I know at least in our district, we've tried to trim down as much as we possibly can from our application, but there's still a lot of different things that you have to have required as part of an application for a public school educator, in addition to work experience and legality things that we have to have in place. And that application process can take a lot of time. And so before somebody wants to sit down and carve out 45 minutes to an hour to apply for a job, they may want some questions answered. And so we try to make sure that they understand they have access points to our team to have those questions answered, and hopefully provide excellent customer service, which really reinforces here's the type of people that you're going to be working alongside and the district you're going to be working for. And then from there, it kind of takes care of itself of them submitting job applications. But that's a long-winded way to say I don't have any perfect solutions right now, but be aggressive in your communication to college and universities in your area to ask about any upcoming incoming graduates. And then if you do have any marketing or advertisement opportunities within your budget, be as specific as possible for your positions that you have out there, so that the viewers and the pool of people that are out there considering applying in a district know exactly what is available within your space. Like I said, the more you can funnel information to them where they're not having to go through multiple clicks through your own website, to me, I think the better off you are.
Awesome. As a follow-up to the last couple of answers you've given me, you've obviously done a lot when it comes to data analysis in your HR practices for yourself, your team, your district. And like you've mentioned, you're a year and a half, 2 years in to your position now. You've trimmed the application, you've heavily analyzed your pipeline stages, all in an effort to reduce the time it takes from application to hire. You've heavily analyzed referral sources for ROI. You've mentioned a bunch of other things that you've done. Rewind maybe a year and a half to 2 years, and maybe put yourself in the position of a lot of folks on the call here that are interested in going down a heavy HR data analysis path to refine some of their practices. Where should they start? What has been maybe one of the more effective places for you to focus on? You've mentioned that all the data that you're looking at was part of systems that you're already using. Where can the folks focus? And maybe what are some of the these metrics that they should start gathering if they're not already to help do exactly what you do?
Good question. Let me try to rewind. I think for me personally, what I did first that really got all this started was, instead of speaking in generics about a teacher shortage and, oh, it's just so hard to find a math teacher, it's impossible to find a chemistry teacher, I started looking at it from the perspective of, okay, what does the data actually say? Like the last 2 years of chemistry openings, how many applicants did we really have during that time? How many years have we opened up a school where they were short a third grade teacher? And why was that? If they had 55 applicants and the job was posted in April, but on July 24th, when the first day of school hit, we had an opening, like we really couldn't secure one person out of those 54 applicants, what action were we taking or inaction were we taking that ultimately resulted in that? And then when you start there, you start to really say, okay, I have my bulleted list now of what data pieces I need to start gathering to really diagnose and see what's going on. And the audience, obviously, I don't know where each person's coming from district wise, but like I've mentioned, we're 14,000 students. So we have 14 schools right now, 5 secondary schools, 9 elementary schools. And so you start with the overarching school district, but then from there you can dig into what's the trend of my northern region versus my southern region. What's the trend of my elementary schools that are opening up each year fully staffed versus an elementary school that has 5 unfilled positions that have long-term subs to start the year. And why is that? And it's having honest conversations with those folks about, hey, did you really give all of your attention when it was the hiring time and that job posted? Or are you just every once in a while looking through your applicant pool? For us, I mean, sometimes it's that idea of having those high expectations, but then I'm a big believer in support of accountability. I'm going to do all I can to deploy as many resources and help with the structure. But there's also check-ins that happen weekly for us. As an example, this morning I talked to 3 principals and 2 department heads before 8 o'clock. And each one of those 5 people was because they have current openings and they know that each week I'm going to do a check-in on what's going on with your applicant pool. It was exciting to go into cabinet today and do my staffing update and be able to share, while we have one school with 6 openings because they got hit right around the holiday season with an influx of classified staff resignations, he was able to speak to every single position, what his applicants look like, when his interviews are scheduled, and he's on the right track. And so I tell you that to say you first start with just the overarching, what are our problem areas, and don't just fall under the premise of, well, it's a teacher shortage, it's hard. I know that data speaks for itself that you showed at the beginning, Kevin, in regards to the graduates that are coming out of colleges in the applicant pool. But the reality is, your data likely doesn't align perfectly with a national trend or a state trend. And so you have to first dig into what does your data say, and then that will drive some of the first action steps that you see. I mean, that's why, like, I think I saw both Kevin's kind of raise your eyebrows when I said at the beginning, like, one of our positives is our applicant pool is robust. We had an elementary teacher posting that went live last Friday. We had 24 applicants by this morning. And so that's just the reality of our elementary area. Why is it like that? We're an area that's booming for young families and teachers that clearly are trying to move out to our area, so they probably want to work close to home. So that's not a big spot that's on my radar, but that doesn't mean I write off all teachers and say, hey, every area we're good to go. And so it's really just digging into your own information and then building out questions from there.
Awesome. So I have a couple of takeaways. You actually just stole my first one a little bit, so we're thinking the same. And then you can add to it if I'm missing anything. But first, I think it was the last thing you said. I think my first takeaway is know your data. Don't rely on national trends or those regional trends or state level trends to understand what's going on in your district. And you've spoken to that really well, Keegan. Because those larger trends may not apply at all to what's happening in your district. So the best data to use to understand what's happening in your district is your data. I think you've driven that point home really well.
Because I do want to add, you and I had a conversation months ago when we were trying to clean up, for the audience, he had referenced pipeline stages earlier that we utilize. And HCA, I had asked him, hey, I need to be able to have certain data pulled from recruit and hire and have it go into frontline so I could start analyzing it. And as we started to look into it and Kevin started to pull some of those pieces for me, we then discussed the term dirty data. And so you have to know your data, but it's also important to make sure you have viable, true data that is in your systems. The reason why we identified we had some dirty data was not every school and department was utilizing our pipeline stages to the depth that we were expecting them to. So we had to back up before I even worried about analyzing the data and put together some PD with our hiring managers of what those expectations were with those pipeline stages, so that when it actually pulls over and I'm analyzing it, I know it's true and valid. So sorry to interrupt you, but I think when we talk about districts knowing their data, you really truly have to make sure, is it viable data that you're pulling, or is it stuff that just gathers up and then eventually you're going to download a spreadsheet or you're going to put it into a chart, but you don't know the accuracy of it or not?
No, it's funny, and I'm laughing over here because you didn't interrupt me, and I'll prove it. You actually just said my 2 and 3 takeaway here. This shows, I said at the beginning, I've learned so much from Keegan over the last year or so. You just took my 2nd and 3rd takeaway, and I swear we didn't plan this. My 2nd takeaway, clean data is king. You can't analyze data to improve your outcomes if your data is poor. So first, evaluate your data logging practices, which is something that Keegan has been very aware of. Are you creating and maintaining data in such a way that it can be analyzed on the back end for change purposes? And another thing, Keegan, that you just mentioned is, evaluating data on your applicants is important, of course, but so is evaluating your own internal processes as well. And you can use a lot of this data for both purposes. And I don't know which one is more important. It's probably going to vary district to district, but don't just analyze your applicants, analyze yourself as well. And that's something I've learned from you as well that I think a lot of folks who probably learn from here too. Is your application too long? You've talked about that. Are your pipelines just too slow? Do you have too many pipelines? And then are you collecting the data to even be able to answer those questions, to be able to evaluate yourself? So again, I've learned so much from Keegan over the years, and that right there proved it. That was funny. That was perfect. It's as if we planned that.
Everybody probably thinks that was scripted. For those of you
no,
who don't
it wasn't at all. My hands were here the whole time. I wasn't typing live. That's funny.
We've probably met virtually 5 times total, I think, in the year plus. I can assure you that was not scripted, but each time we talk, we both learn a lot from each other. He's super responsive to anything that I want, and I have a boss who uses the phrase all the time. If I can think it, we should be able to apply it when it comes to systems, platforms, and data in terms of information that we're trying to gather. And so it's been nice because Kevin and I think, push each other of, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Can you do it? And then he's able to do it, which then challenges me to figure out how am I going to solve the next issue that comes up from that data that's uncovered.
Awesome. So those are all my takeaways. Keegan, I'm assuming we have the same takeaways, probably. Kevin, are there any other takeaways that you want to summarize?
Well, once I catch my breath here, there's some amazing amount of information and analysis that came in over the course of this past hour. I guess one question I had, and which I'll channel the audience maybe, and this is for you, Kevin. Obviously, Keegan is a power user of the platform, and also has a very sophisticated district and a large district that's going on. Can you talk a little bit about maybe different sizes of districts and how the platform can function when you say you have a smaller district, say here in New Jersey, or maybe even a larger when you're talking about a top 20 district?
Yeah, I mean, to Keegan's point that he made earlier, that I think I've tried to drive home, a lot of the data that folks like Keegan do analyze, and a lot of the data that I look at and in the system that I manage as well in human capital analytics is data that's being collected anyways. And it's not these really wild systems that only your very large districts can go out and get. It's data from your HR system, or it's data from where you advertise your job postings. So it's data that's already being collected, and it's really just a matter of accessing that data and then using it for change. And then making that process cyclical as well. So thinking, how can I write the referral sources on my application such that when I look at the finished application, the referral source data actually makes sense. So it's not so much a what systems to go get, and it's only something that some districts can afford. It's really just systems that probably a vast majority of districts have, something like a basic HR system, or your recruiting and hiring system, or where you advertise your job postings. And it's really just a matter of accessing that data and using it for change.
Yeah.
Keegan, do you have anything to add to that idea?
No, I mean, I think you nailed it. The one thing that we have added onto our application that wasn't already there and available to us data-wise was the referral source, like I said. And I believe that was actually an optional question in the past. We just identified how important that question was, and to make sure that our referral source was a true comprehensive reflection of how candidates could hear from us. Other than that, though, all that data that is now being reviewed on a weekly basis was always there for us. It's just now in a digestible, organized manner.
Yeah. Another question that just came in from the audience: how do we get a frontline Kevin, someone that can work with us, based on our needs? And I'll interpret that in terms of what is the relationship with a district and with frontline in terms of when you're using these sort of technologies and platforms. I mean, it is, I'm assuming, much more than just a piece of shelfware that you're purchasing, right?
Yeah. So in all the conversations that Keegan and I have had in the past have mainly come up through my work at Frontline Education. Again, my most recent job is the product manager of Human Capital Analytics. And Human Capital Analytics is a product that Keegan's district utilizes. So a lot of my conversations have come up working with Keegan because his district is a user of the product that I manage. So that's where a lot of our conversations have come up, but we've also had a few conversations as well, just more generally speaking, like this one. I had a panel with him last week with a couple of other HR folks around the country as well. And Frontline hosts webinars of various degrees that I've had the privilege of participating in, where I talk about data like this and data in larger trends and that sort of thing as well. So a lot of these specific conversations I've had with Keegan are just in the role as it relates to the product that I manage. So that's probably where a lot of that's coming from, I think. But I'd like to think that Frontline is incredibly active, getting our thought leadership messages out there, trying to engage as much as we can with the front lines of education. And I'm always happy and privileged to be able to do so, and I enjoy every second of these calls.
Yeah, and maybe Keegan, you can talk about just your workings there.
Yeah, so Frontline obviously plays a key role because we utilize 3 different applications for them aside from the human capital analytics. So the recruit and hire, absence management, and Frontline Central. And today's conversation obviously fixated on the recruit and hire piece, but within human capital analytics, we actually utilize that to analyze our absence management, our subfill rates, our trends on Mondays and Fridays, which schools, different things like that. And so it really just comes down to that was the platform that we chose. So then that was what led to then human capital analytics. But that's not to say it's not available out there in other areas as well. It really comes down to whatever platform you have, like I talked about previously. You really just need to map out what are your short and long-term goals within your hiring practices or your HR goals in general, and then figure out what data is available within that platform, maybe what data is missing, and engage those platform owners and figure out what you can do to move forward on it. I don't anticipate at any time data analysis trending backwards or going away. And so
Hope
I
not.
would say whether you're using Talent Ed, Frontline, or any other platform, they're going to be responsive to your requests because they understand the need that you have as a client. And so for us, we've been fortunate because Kevin and I have connected well and had similar mindsets on what we're trying to accomplish. But that's not to say it has to be any other way than you just start with what data do you have within your own district, and analyze what your key performing indicators are going to be and start building out some of those short-term steps and long-term steps to map out an action plan that you're going to integrate.
Well, I knew the toughest part of my job this afternoon was to end the conversation. There's so many great insights and ideas that are being shared here. I know that the audience appreciates that. I'd like to thank Kevin and Keegan today for a very informative presentation. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating and have a great day.